No problem. So to start our conversation, after watching our video, we're going to ask each panelist what their initial thoughts are about the video, about stigma, and then also other issues surrounding period poverty. So I'm going to ask Dr. Appelt, can you kind of start us off with your initial thoughts about this video?
Absolutely. I think the video is a fantastic place to start. Right? And so we got to hear from women from all different cultures talking about the silence surrounding something that happens to over half the population for most of their lives. Right? And it is phenomenal if you take a step back and think about that. And I think that the silence around that is something that lends itself toward shame and potentially stigma.
Thank you, Dr. Appelt. Dr. DeVito, can you also add to Dr. Appelt's comments?
Yes, I could not agree more with what Dr. Appelt has already offered. I think that, being in the healthcare profession, prior to entering into that profession, as many of the women on the video expressed, period talk about the female body, what the female body does, was taboo conversation. Many of us on the call today didn't have many conversations about those things with healthcare providers that they encountered, family members. Probably the majority of conversations that you had around these topics were with your peers. And so it's an excellent way to share this information, but probably many of us didn't get the full breadth of what things were, how things worked, options that we had. So I'm thrilled that we are having this conversation today, because I think it's having conversations like this where we're going to start to be able to feel more the idea of community, around this topic, to be able to support one another, to be able to educate the next generation, and to really start, turning the tide of taboo around these topics.
Absolutely. And Professor Kolesar.
Oh, I totally agree. I loved the video. I thought it was a great place to start. I think also I keep coming back to this idea of stigma. And I know that college students are at risk of poverty and we might not recognize that. So in addition to having the stigma of not wanting to talk about menstruation, there also may be the stigma that they can't maybe afford menstrual hygiene products. So I definitely think it's multifaceted, and I'm really excited to be here. So thank you.
So I heard a lot of talk about stigma, and Professor Kolesar kind of alluded to the idea of period poverty. So I'm wondering, Dr. A, if you could talk a little bit about the role that stigmatization might play in women's health and how it can be harmful, and how this issue and period poverty is connected to larger sociological and systemic contexts.
Yeah, absolutely, Dee. So I think that one of the things that is overlooked, and even within my own discipline in sociology, we tend to think about issues of shame and particularly stigma as something that happens really just at an interpersonal level. In sociology, we call that the micro level, and that's the level at which we interact with one another. Well, stigma, as we're learning from a sociological perspective, also has implications at the social structural level. So if you have a situation in which something that is happening, either a bodily, a function, or maybe some kind of physical trait, right, about someone, and it's something that is associated with shame or stigmatization, that can actually be leveraged at the structural level to benefit folks. So if we think about something like the costs associated at the governmental level in our society with deeming feminine hygiene products, as an example, as necessities, right? As soon as you do that, then you can spend your WIC dollars, right, which are public assistance dollars, directly, on products like these. These products are not cheap. Okay? If we make these products freely available, again, these products are not cheap. Right? So these are expensive kinds of decisions. Well, it becomes really easy for folks in positions of power to be able to say, oh, well, we don't talk about those things, right? Those things are not important, and to minimize those things or sort of make jokes, right, about those things. And if you think about the sort of shame associated with periods and how we consider, it's in the mainstream, right? Sometimes we make jokes, and you see this, on television or other forms of media. If a woman is, cranky in some way, oh, she must be on her period. She must be on the rag, right? We joke about, this kind of thing. So it becomes really easy for politicians and others to poke fun at this topic rather than to support it. So stigmatization in this way can be leveraged by persons in power to keep others away or down in some fashion. Thanks.
Do any of the other panelists have any comments to Dr. Appelt that they would like to add in?
I do. I was recently reading an article, and in addition to stigma, 14% of the college students that were surveyed experienced period poverty within the past year, and 10% of those students experienced it every single month. And those students that experience period poverty every single month were far more likely to report moderate or severe depression. So I think that also will feed into the stigma as well.
Go ahead, Dr. DeVito.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, to piggyback that up, we think about the idea of, today's culture, all of the things that are happening and all of the things that everyone is having to work through on a daily basis. And to have a college student in this scenario that likely experiencing period poverty is probably coupled with challenges in other ways related to potentially food insecurity, an area that Professor Kolesar is very familiar with, potentially even housing insecurity. So we're talking about multiple layers of things that students are having to think about and work through. And I think that, again, having conversations like this are important for us to have as a university, particularly for faculty and for staff to begin to understand that decisions that are made with students being able to make decisions may be multifaceted, and it may not just be simply a choice of whether to engage in something or not, or to participate in something or not, that there may be many other factors that are going into that process.
I want to circle back to Professor Kolesar in a second to touch on some of those layers that Dr. DeVito brought up. But before I do, Dr. DeVito, I know in our email correspondences this week, you said that you had some experiences and encounters with period poverty in your own work. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I have practice experience as a labor and delivery nurse here in the Pittsburgh area, and then also as a pediatric nurse practitioner that worked in the school system. So in both of those capacities, I had firsthand experience with the individuals that I served in my role as a nurse and a nurse practitioner experiencing period poverty. For those of you that maybe don't have as much of a background about what happens when a woman has a baby or an individual has a baby. Afterwards, after that infant is delivered, the placenta will be delivered, and there is essentially an open wound where that placenta had adhered to the wall of the uterus. So when that placenta pulls away, it's just like a wound that would go through the process of healing. There's bleeding that occurs from there. And we see that that type of bleeding, although it be very heavy at first, will begin to lighten over time. But we see that this bleeding will extend for up to 6 to 8 weeks after the delivery of that infant. So when you think about the idea of needing access to menstrual products. We're talking about an individual needing extensive access for the next 6 to 8 weeks. And especially in the very beginning, the amount of lochia that they have, which is the type of drainage that they're having from this wound, is much heavier than a menstrual period. So all of this to say, I've encountered women in different capacities in this postpartum period. One that really sticks out for me is women who have an infant that is admitted to the neonatal intensive care unit. And again, this idea of, multiple layers. They have an infant that's critically ill. They've just delivered an infant, so they're going through the process of healing. They have the stressors of having a critically ill infant. Many of them oftentimes have decided to provide breast milk for their infant, so they're trying to pump their breast milk on top of it, and then to throw in this layer of stress that could be associated with not having access to a reliable access to feminine hygiene products related to the idea of period poverty. It is real. Many times I would have conversations with some of the staff that would be integrated into the NICU care, particularly related to social workers, and talking about the needs of parents on this unit after their infant had been admitted. And one thing that was solidly brought up was this idea of having donations of menstrual products, because women so desperately needed that access, and oftentimes were experiencing challenges seeking them out and having them available. Another group of individuals that I also have seen experience period poverty as well are school age students who have started their menstrual cycle. I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I was able to work closely with the Always company to be able to secure menstrual products to make available to the students for the school where I was at. Still though, the challenge is that stigma, the stigma of being able to present and to say, to the school nurse practitioner, I don't have enough supply of menstrual products at home. I'd like to take some. Trying to break down the stigma and break down the barriers of being able to have those conversations, having them, be available in the bathroom with the idea that, you don't have to ask. If there's a need, feel free to go in and help yourself. Just trying to make that conversation more normalized was definitely a goal of mine, but equally a challenge.
Thank you for those comments, Dr. DeVito. It really provided different perspectives on this topic that we might not initially always think about when we hear period poverty. So before we go on to our next question, I'm going to ask Dee to kind of read a few notes from one of our panelists who couldn't make it tonight, but she still sent in some really good details about her work and also what she's recognized. So Dee.
Thank you. So I put her name in the chat and her website. Her name is Ayana Bridges. She's a birth doula and Black birth advocate and founder of the Birthing Hut. One of her clients actually went into labor, which is why she wasn't able to join us tonight, but we still want to make sure that she was able to share this with us. She says, the primary barrier to access of menstrual hygiene products is cost. The discussion of pink tax is a waste of time. The point is that these products are essential and expensive, period. These products should be free and provided at places of convenience, such as doctors' offices, schools, welfare offices, and WIC offices. The cost of these products are a burden. Women can spend almost $20 a month, and that price is on the lower side of the estimate. Prices vary based on duration and the heaviness of your bleeding. Then we have to take into account the brand of the products and if they are, quote, organic. This burden is causing women to create innovative, unsanitary alternatives such as rags, toilet paper, or even Pampers. Along with these unsanitary practices comes the practice of wearing tampons for a longer than the recommended period of time frame, now at risk for TSS or toxic shock syndrome. TSS is a rare and potentially fatal medical condition caused by bacterial infection. Recurrent discharge from lengthy tampon use, rashes, and inflammation, all of which can cause physical and mental trauma. Systemic racism is the reason for the economic and financial crises contributing to non-access for menstrual hygiene products. Lack of education and acknowledgement for women's health is another contributing factor for period poverty. Understanding that these products are important to women and necessary for many reasons other than a menstrual cycle. Postpartum bleeding can occur for 4 weeks. That's an expense in addition to preparation for a newborn. There are also medical conditions which symptoms are heavy bleeding and requires menstrual products. Women have no choice to experience the bleeding, and we shouldn't be shamed, burdened, or taxed for it. And again, that was from Ayana Bridges, birth doula and Black birth advocate, founder of the Birthing Hut. That relates to, I think, a lot of people's expertise here, so we'll make it around, but I want to go back to Professor Kolesar to give her comments and talk to us a little bit about how food insecurity ties into this all.
Yeah. So as Dr. DeVito alluded to, food insecurity, housing insecurity, period poverty, all kind of go hand in hand, especially when we consider our college-aged students. A student that has very limited funds may have to choose between menstrual hygiene products and food. And they might not feel comfortable going to school with the products that they have because they might be using toilet paper, for example. So at Duquesne, the Brother Keating Initiative does have menstrual hygiene products available. So that is a really helpful place to start. But it's not available widely across campus, as you all know. I do think it is something to consider for our LGBTQ community that, sometimes we'll have a trans student that is menstruating. So we have to consider access points for all types of students. So that is definitely something, in the research that I'm doing about food insecurity, it absolutely comes up that period poverty is prevalent and there are some exorbitant costs, and people, as several other people have said, do we want to go with the organic route, or maybe are there other options like a cup, for example, that we might be able to minimize cost in the long run. But yeah, there's a lot I think that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you,
And I
Professor
just wanted-
Kolesar. Oh, you can go, Dee.
Sorry, Rachel. I just wanted to welcome Dr. Sarah Miller to the conversation. We had a little bit of miscommunication with the location, but she's here now and we're really excited that she is a part of this conversation. I can let her jump in and say a little bit about how she is going to be fitting into this panel tonight.
Okay, thank you all. Yeah, there was a little bit of miscommunication. That's all. That's okay. So I'm Dr. Sarah Miller. I'm sorry I missed a little bit of the first part of the conversation, but I work on ancient and medieval women, and so I'm not talking so much about period poverty as it's happening right now, and I work more on the history of periods. So, but I still think it's relevant to this conversation because there's some crazy ideas about periods in antiquity and the Middle Ages. And I think that there's still some kind of ways for us to think through how those periods talked about periods and how it still seems relevant today. So I'm sorry, I missed out on the first part of the presentation. So I don't know what you all talked about. I'm so sorry. So I am really focused on how women's periods were seen in history, and especially how the periods were associated with illness in the ancient world and in the medieval world, and how women were treated because of their periods, like, you know, ideas of hysteria, ideas of women having wandering wombs inside of their bodies, and also how menstruation was associated with lactation too. So that was another thing I want to talk about how menstrual fluid was seen as an excess body fluid in the ancient and medieval world. And so you needed to get rid of it somehow. And so, like, it was a good idea to menstruate every month so that you could be healthy. But if it didn't work out that way, then you could become very sick, and your wound could actually wander around your body trying to find a way to get rid of the excess fluid in your body. And then also, and one more thing about lactation. So in the ancient and medieval world, the idea was that women were more fluid, more dense, more wet, more loose than men. And so they had this excess fluid they needed to get rid of. And it could be through menstrual fluid, even nosebleeds, hemorrhoid bleeding. But the idea is that women just had excess moisture they needed to get rid of. And so they needed to do that in some way. And so also breast milk was considered to be super hot cooked menstrual fluid, if I can word it that way. So the idea is that the menstrual fluid would be in a woman's body. It was just excess moisture, and it would go into her breasts and get cooked hot or super hot in her breasts, because that was considered to be the hottest place of a woman's body. And then the breast milk was then just super hot cooked menstrual fluid that then could feed the baby. So the idea was that, you know, menstrual fluid fed the baby inside of the womb when the baby was being cooked in there. And then the menstrual fluid would then be extra cooked in the breasts and then feed the baby outside of the breast. So there are lots of ideas about like how a woman should breastfeed because she is using her menstrual fluid to feed the baby. So anyway, that's probably a lot, but I want to talk about how do we take care of periods, and then also how we take care of lactation on campus. Okay, that's my thoughts about ancient and medieval stuff. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Dr. Miller. We are looking forward to hearing more about that stuff as the conversation goes on. Right before you had come on, we had just read a statement, which I will put in the chat for anyone in case they'd like to save it or look at it, from Ayanna Bridges, who's the founder of the Birthing Hut. And she talked about a little bit about illness, about the risk of toxic shock syndrome. Mm-hmm. And she talked about how expensive products are for women that are related to feminine hygiene. She touched a little bit on postpartum bleeding, which I know Dr. DeVito had touched on as well. And then she went on to discuss some of the systemic factors related to that. So I will turn it back over to the panelists. I think Dr. Appelt, I think it's been longest since you've spoken, if you'd like to jump in.
Well, I guess one of the things that I was thinking about as I was listening to others speak, particularly Professor Kostler, we were talking about period poverty and how it's related to food insecurity. And we sort of think of, I mean, I don't know about everybody else here, you know, but if I want to buy feminine hygiene products, I buy them at the grocery store, right? We tend to sort of lump, you know, these necessary items, dare I use the words necessary items, right? We tend to lump these things together, and we make these purchases there. And it seems that while it is embarrassing, right, maybe to go visit a food pantry or to receive, food stamps or the equivalent, this seems to have an additional sort of shame to it, right? Where do you even turn to? Who do you even ask? Right? Do you have these products? I can't, afford them. And it sort of puts you in a position to have to talk about something that's supposed to be relatively unmentionable. And so that was one thing that I've been thinking about as I was listening. And another thing I was thinking about is the consequences, right? The consequences of this. And we heard some from Ayanna Bridges and Via D, issues of toxic shock syndrome or, other forms of infection from using, maybe wash rags or tissues or, something like this to absorb blood. But there are consequences beyond this. Right. So if you don't have the adequate, protection, you may feel as if you need to stay home. And what kinds of activities, might you miss out on? And Professor Kosler, mentioned this, that, maybe you don't go places, you miss out on things. Well, this is 25% of the time between, roughly between the ages of, 13 and 50. That's a lot. Well, if you think about other variables in a woman's life course between the ages of 13 and 50, what are we doing? Well, we're receiving education, we're establishing careers, maybe we're raising young children. These are all things that require us to be present in some sort of way. And if you're having to check out 25% of the time, this can result in even further inequality, right? Which can lead to even more financial insecurity in different ways.
I think also as we think about health and trying to maybe stretch that dollar, somebody might opt for like a heavier flow tampon and keep it in for longer. So when you think about that risk of toxic shock, absolutely, it's very much there.
Dr. Miller, did you have something to say? I saw you go off mute. I wasn't sure if you wanted to add to it.
Well, I don't know if you all talked about this already, but I'm curious about providing products for students on campus. Have you all talked about that already?
We haven't discussed it, but this will kind of be a little segue into kind of why we are having this panel discussion. So the Sociology Club will be starting a feminine hygiene product drive soon. And really the purpose of it is to provide these products to students on campus who might not be able to have them, or who might be in a, for example, college hall and might not have the products that they need right away. And so this will be able to give them an opportunity to have that and have those products. But then we also want to provide information for individuals who may not know a whole lot about menstrual health. So we also want to provide products, but then also provide information, because providing information helps people to also remain healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so to kind of continue in our conversation, to go to Dr. DeVito, so what role does education play in women's health, and how can school systems and universities do better to address the issues we've discussed so far?
I think all of our speakers have so poignantly said, and we also saw in the video that there's a lot of false information that a lot of times is the basis upon where people make their decisions, or even stereotypes about particular topics such as this. So I think education is huge in the sense that, the more we can talk about these topics, the more normal it's going to become. The more we can have open lines of communication about just the natural state of being around these topics, to then have the ability to dig deeper and to start talking about the stigma that surrounds them. So I think truly it starts in conversations just like this, where we start to unpack all of the things that have built upon one another for generations, to be able to start providing accurate information, comprehensive education, and to start taking away stigma about conversations like this. So truly, it starts with the education. And I think this is an excellent way to do that. So kudos to all of you for putting this together.
Thank you so much, Dr. DeVito. And to go back to Professor Kolesar, can you kind of talk about, as you've mentioned before, the importance of having access on campus? And so I know you've done some work with the food pantry on campus. And so how has that work kind of connected to some of what we've discussed today?
So I visited the Brother Keating Initiative Food Pantry last week, and I just wanted to make sure that there were feminine or menstrual hygiene products available, and there definitely were. So there are students that are receiving help, and there are some students that are receiving help every single month. And it's a wonderful program. You don't have to prove that you need anything. It's quiet and it's kind of secluded, but it's just a really nice way that you can get some of your needs met. So I think some of the research that I've seen talks about, also related to stigma and campus pantry usage, is that if it comes from the students, then it's more normalized. And then students, even though they might be embarrassed, are going to be more likely to access those resources. So, I think if there are menstrual hygiene products everywhere, everybody knows people menstruate. So just the normalization, I think, is really, really important.
Absolutely. And so, Dr. Miller, can you kind of share some of the ways that these historical theories that you've mentioned before and perspectives kind of are challenged in the present day society, either with stigma or with other ways of looking at period poverties, whether from the past or even how they're recognized in the present?
Well, I just have to put it out there completely that, the Greco-Roman world and the medieval world was incredibly misogynistic. And so periods were a way to see women as being sick or healthy. If it worked out well, they were seen healthy, but it was just like a main way of seeing women as being sick and needing to be secluded. So I'm concerned about that still now today. Do girls and women feel like they're sick, or that something is abnormal, or they don't have access to the things that they need? I don't know if you all talked about this already, but I'm just like, why are all of the tampon dispensers empty in College Hall? I've never seen a tampon in College Hall, ever. Even if you pay for it, even if it's 25 cents, they're just empty. So I think that we have to think through about, menstruation being something that's healthy and regular. I mean, for some people it's regular, for other people it's not, but common, and that it's just a part of just basic health to have access to the things that you need. I mean, I'll tell you all, there have been times where I've needed a tampon or a pad in College Hall and I haven't been able to get one because they aren't there. Yeah. Okay, that's all I have on that one.
Thank you. So I want to ask a question to really anyone who can jump in. So as we've talked about, shifting to like how we've seen action taken on campus and how there is lack of action taken on campus. So from your perspectives, and we can start with Dr. DeVito, what can we do in addition to the drive that the Sociology Club will be starting? What else can we do as students to kind of take action and address these issues?
Yeah, so Ayana and I were actually talking a little bit about this. It's an amazing initiative that you're putting together. And I wonder if we might be able to pair that to take a step further to maybe also have a drive for an organization much like Ayana's, where it's, we're kind of serving two communities of individuals, those on campus and those in our surrounding communities who are experiencing period poverty. And, that just elated Ayana that could maybe be a possibility. So I think there are definitely multiple groups on campus that could continue to support this endeavor that you're going to start and to make further connections to it. So I think that's one thing to maybe potentially think about, because we want to, we want to serve others. We want to serve our fellow students, but we want to serve others in our community as well. Truly every individual should have the right to access to these things. So I think that's definitely something to maybe consider if that resonates with anyone. But I really like the idea of you talking about having information available too, because, not everybody was able to come to this talk today. Not everyone is having these conversations like we are today. And I think the more we can normalize information and to start these conversations, which may be, an information sheet like you're mentioning, I think that's great. I think that's an excellent way. And maybe there's more connections that can be made with the food insecurity piece too. And I'm sure Professor Kolesar has a lot more ideas about this, but, maybe kind of cross communicating when some of the information is going out about period poverty and access on campus, that there may be some statements about food insecurity as well and access along those lines, and vice versa, since the two oftentimes are paired with one another. And I'm sure Professor Kolesar has some more ideas about that as well.
I think it would be really neat to get, I think this is an amazing start. And I think the more students are aware, the more interest you're going to gain, and the more products, obviously. But I think that verbiage can be identified. I know that some professors are actually putting messages in their syllabi that talk about basic needs security. So that is just something that is a way for people to recognize, like, hey, other people might be struggling too. So, and as faculty members, that's a way to kind of show that I'm here for you. I want you to be successful. This is something that we can do to help. So I think just increasing awareness, and, if you need menstruation products, there's maybe also the likelihood that you might be struggling for food as well. So there's these resources available, and without shame. So I think that the stigma piece, I'm so glad it keeps coming up in varied forms. So yeah, this is really exciting. Well done.
I want to give Dr. Appelt an option to jump in, but before she does, while we're on the topic of stigma again, I just wanted to also go back to what Dr. Miller said earlier about how there's just never any tampons or feminine hygiene products. She's never seen one in College Hall. And I just wanted to note how that poses a barrier to women's education and women's careers also, because it's not just people who are in poverty and not able to get access to them. It's also people who forgot one that day and got their period and didn't know that it was coming, and now they have to leave because they don't have a way to stop that, or they have now soiled their pants, which is an embarrassing thing that you're going to be shamed for. So people would maybe opt to leave and miss their class that day or go home from work, which taking that time off is invaluable. You can't just do that at a whim. So I'll give it over to Dr. A now, but I just really wanted to make that connection and also echo what Professor Kolesar said about how the stigma keeps coming up. And I do think that that's an important piece of all of this.
Thanks, Dee. And so one of the things that I really love about the Students Initiative here to provide, these products, make them freely available in the restrooms. One of the really cool things about this is this actually, I think, promotes community among women at Duquesne. And I know that there are some, women's groups and things that are, by women, for women that happen on the campus, but I think you can't have too few, particularly in higher education. So this makes me smile. I'm glad to see this. I think that the idea that there's this trust, right, that we're going to leave the objects freely available in the ladies' room. It speaks highly, right, to who we are as a university community, and the idea of take one if you need one, leave one, right, if you have one, is a way that we can all kind of participate in this. I don't know. So it's a lovely idea. Kudos, students.
And I would like to ask all of the panelists to answer this question. So I'll just go in alphabetical order after I ask it. But I am just kind of wondering, if viewers were only able to take away one thing from tonight's discussion, one thing in total, what would you, in your position or with your expertise about this topic, what would you want viewers to take away from tonight, and what would you want them to really remember about this topic? Dr. A, I can go in reverse alphabetical order since Dr. A just finished speaking. Dr. Miller, if you'd kick us off, please.
Okay, well, my takeaway is that women lead, and they've been doing it for centuries, and we need to take care of our women bleeders because that's what most women do. I also think it's closely related to lactation support and contraception support too. So that is an issue that I know it's not really part of this panel discussion really, because we're talking about periods, but let's face it, like periods are about contraception too. So Duquesne, as I'm sure you all know, does not provide contraceptive care for students or faculty. You have to go through your pharmacy to get a pharmacy card for your contraceptive care. So I know that's kind of like a side note, but that's another topic that I would love to hear your all's views about, although I can't say that I'm hopeful that Duquesne will provide contraception for any faculty and students here at Duquesne. But that's also a part of menstruation is contraception. So that's all I'm going to say about that. All right.
So there's also, just our little side notes. As we're talking about education, I think that's also a really great area to just reinforce consent, to reinforce STIs. So I think once you have that link and menstrual health is a topic, maybe you can continue to build on that with those education pieces, like Dr. Miller mentioned. So I think that just noting that students are bringing this forward, so it's student identified, I think is a really, really important component of this discussion. And then also, I just think not that many people might recognize that this is a problem. So I think just bringing your awareness in the relationship between food insecurity and housing insecurity, and the awareness that there are resources and that a person shouldn't be embarrassed if they need a little bit of help.
Yeah, I think echoing and building off of a lot that's been discussed already, I think it's, looking at your peers here, Rachel, Dee, Kendall, Sydney, who were not afraid to step out and to talk to one another about this, to open up the dialogue. And I think it's, if it's having the courage to come together and to bring up topics that maybe aren't so popular, that maybe aren't so comfortable. I think we're going to move the dial on things that are important but uncomfortable, to start having conversations just like this. So I think, looking at your peers and using that as a great example of what can be done and what can change by having conversations and feeling that community support of one another.
So many great things. So I think if I were to add anything as a take-home message in the longer term here, would be to think about the big picture too, right? So think about these structural elements, and let me tell you what I mean by that. So we tend to think of something like menstruation, right, as an individual activity. It takes place within, right, the body of individual women, or within the bodies of individual women. And if we think about the shame associated with that, or potentially, you know, stigma associated with that, we think of that as the embarrassment that occurs maybe when someone knows when we're bleeding, or when we couldn't control our bleeding and, you know, we've made a mess on our clothes, or, you know, something like that. But the issue is larger, right? The issue of period poverty, the issue of period shame, the issue of period stigma, this exists within the larger sex gender system within our society. We need to think about this. So if we're going to fight period poverty, and we're doing something on campus, and this is a fantastic initiative, if we're going to do something about this beyond the level of a single campus, we need to think about why this isn't happening nationwide. Okay? Why aren't women at the postpartum stage provided with this? Why aren't they provided with this when they leave the hospital? Why isn't it covered by, I don't know, Blue Cross Blue Shield? Hey, why do we pay out of pocket for these items? And we need to think about that. And we also need to think about the way that we talk about periods, the way that we listen to others talk about periods, and the way that we respond to this. If this is able to be considered a laughing matter, or a girl's problem, or just a private issue, it's not taken seriously, and it's easy to dismiss in very serious arenas, okay, where we need folks to vote and think differently about this issue, so that we can actually achieve period justice.
Period justice. That's going to be our next panel title, period justice. And I think we're about to move over into the Q&A session and open up the floor for anyone who might have some questions for our panelists. But before we do, I'm not an expert in this topic, and I'm not sure if any of the panelists are, but I just wanted to say, especially as it relates to stigma, that a lot of trans men bleed too. And so this is for them as well. And we're hoping that when we launch this product drive, that we can put a smaller amount of products in the men's bathroom too, and try and relieve some of that stigma as individuals might be going through some kind of transition. I will now open it up to Q&A if anybody has any questions. Rachel, I know you have some live audience members, so let us know if they have any.
I don't have any questions here, but once again, thank you so much to all of our panelists. This has been an amazing conversation, and to get like so much different insight from different perspectives has been awesome.
Just echo what Rachel said. Thank you so much. And also thank you, Kendall, for helping us put this together, Rachel, for everything that you did. And of course, to all of our panelists for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. And we're going to look about this next panel, period justice.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Good night.
Thank you. And thank you, Kendall. Everyone take Latin. Kendall takes Latin.
Okay. Yeah, I take Latin. Oh wait, I did want to say though, I was just looking up my at my Costco and like Sam's Club memberships. I feel like such like an old lady, like I collect memberships to different like superstores. But I was looking at that and I noticed that pads, like a pack of pads, like 180 count, is only $30 there. Whereas like if you go to like Target and East Liberty, it's like almost $20 for like an eighth of the amount of pads. And I do feel like I wanted to just say that I feel like there's a socioeconomic stigma, definitely, just to kind of echo what everybody else was saying before. There's definitely a socioeconomic stigma added to that. Also, Dee, Dee and Rachel, I don't know if we figured out yet where to drop off donations.